The rain hammered against the glass walls of the private terminal like fists demanding entry. Elijah Cole stood frozen at the gate, his tailored navy suit soaked through, his silver wristwatch catching the cold fluorescent light. In his trembling hand was a photograph, creased, faded, stained with years of regret. Amara. Her warm golden-brown face smiled up at him from happier days, eyes full of trust he'd shattered. "Sir, your flight to the coast leaves in 10 minutes. He didn't move. Couldn't. Because 5 years ago, he'd left her dying in a hospital bed, her frail hand reaching for him as he turned his back. The doctors said 6 months. He'd believed the lie his business partner whispered, that she'd been unfaithful, that she deserved abandonment. So he fled. Built empires overseas. Buried his guilt under penthouses and power. But yesterday, a letter arrived. Forwarded through 3 countries, smudged with coastal salt. "Mr. Cole, your wife is alive. She's been asking for you. Dr. Marianne Chun." Alive. The word was a knife twisting in his chest. The boarding call echoed. His legs finally moved, but his soul remained paralyzed by a single soul-crushing question. What kind of man abandons the woman he vowed to protect, and what does he become when she survives without him? Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. We love seeing our global family tuning in. What would you have done if this happened to you? Tell us in the comments. 7 years earlier, Elijah Cole had everything a man could want, except peace. His empire, Cole Industries, stretched across 3 continents. Glass towers bore his name. Forbes called him the architect of modern wealth. But in the quiet of his marble penthouse, surrounded by modern art and imported leather, he was hollow. Every deal closed felt like another brick in a prison he'd built himself. Then came Amara. She wasn't like the socialites who orbited his world. She was a non-profit director, organizing literacy programs in underserved communities. They met at a charity gala he'd attended for tax purposes. While others pitched business proposals, she challenged him. "You have all this money, Mr. Cole. What are you actually building?" That question haunted him until he called her. Their courtship was fire and water, his controlled intensity melting against her gentle warmth. She wore flowing white dresses and spoke about purpose over profit. He loved how she made him feel human again, how her long natural curls would fall across his chest as they lay together, planning futures neither believed possible for people like them. They married in a small coastal ceremony. No press. No spectacle. Just Amara in a simple ivory gown, her golden brown skin glowing in the sunset, whispering vows that made his voice crack. For 3 years, she was his sanctuary. But Elijah's business partner, Marcus Hale, saw her as a threat. Marcus needed Elijah focused, ruthless, expanding. Not softened by love. So Marcus planted the seeds of doubt, whispered conversations about Amara's secret meetings, doctored photographs, fabricated evidence. And when Amara fell ill, when the cancer diagnosis came swift and brutal, Marcus delivered the final blow. "She's been lying to you, Elijah. The whole marriage, it was for your money." Elijah believed him. Because believing was easier than facing the truth, that he'd always been too broken to accept real love. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and dying flowers. Amara lay propped against thin pillows, her once radiant golden-brown skin now ashen, her slender frame disappearing beneath white sheets. And 4 drip fed slowly into her arm. Her natural curls, usually full of life, were wrapped in a soft silk scarf, a small dignity against the indignity of illness. She looked up when Elijah entered, and for a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. "Elijah, you came." He stood in the doorway, his navy suit immaculate, his face carved from stone. The folder Marcus had given him burned in his inner pocket. Bank statements. Photographs. Evidence of betrayal. "How long?" His voice was ice. "The doctors say." "How long have you been lying to me?" The hope died in her eyes. She understood immediately. "What are you talking about?" He pulled out the folder, threw it onto her bed. Papers scattered across her lap like accusations. Her trembling hands picked up a photograph, her, sitting across from a man at a cafe. The man was her oncologist, Dr. Richard Chun, Marianne's husband. But the angle made it look intimate. Damning. "Elijah, this isn't." "Don't." His voice cracked like thunder. I gave you everything. My name. My trust. My heart. And you, he couldn't finish. The rage was a living thing, choking him. Amara's tears came silently. Please, let me explain. But he was already backing toward the door. His assistant had the jet ready. Tokyo. London. Anywhere but here, watching the woman he loved, thought he loved, die while wearing the mask of a victim. Elijah, please don't leave me. Not like this. I love you. I've only ever loved you. Her voice broke on the last word. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the frame. His reflection stared back from the darkened window, a man who'd built kingdoms but couldn't recognize truth when it reached for him. Goodbye, Amara. The door closed with a whisper. Behind it, Amara collapsed against her pillows, her heart monitor screaming in erratic rhythm as nurses rushed in. But Elijah was already in the elevator, descending, his phone pressed to his ear. Marcus, prepare the Tokyo office. I'm leaving tonight. And draft the divorce papers. I want this finished. He never heard her scream his name. He never saw her reach for the call button with the last of her strength. He simply left. And in that moment, Elijah Cole made the choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 5 years passed like a slow-burning wound. Elijah built his empire higher. Tokyo, Singapore, Dubai. Each new tower was a monument to the man he'd forced himself to become. Colder, sharper, untouchable. He worked 18-hour days, slept 4 hours if the nightmares allowed, and never spoke her name. But Amara haunted him anyway. She appeared in the reflection of boardroom windows. In the scent of jasmine perfume on passing strangers. In the empty side of his king-sized bed in his London penthouse. His therapist, the third one, after he fired the first 2 for digging too deep, suggested he was experiencing complicated grief. You never got closure, Mr. Cole. Closure. As if death could be closed like a business deal. Marcus assured him she'd passed quietly, 6 months after he left. The hospital called. I handled the arrangements. You were in Tokyo closing the Yamamoto merger. I didn't want to disturb you. Elijah never asked where she was buried. Never requested proof. Because looking would mean feeling, and feeling would destroy the fortress he'd built around his heart. But cracks were forming. It started small. A barista in Dubai who looked like her, same warm smile, same graceful movements. His hand shook so badly he spilled his coffee. Then, a news article about a women's charity making waves on the American coast. The Phoenix Foundation, empowering women abandoned by their partners. The founder's face was turned away in the photograph, but something about the image made his chest tighten. Then came the private investigator's report. He'd hired the man on impulse, 3 months ago, drunk on whiskey and regret. Find out what happened to Amara Cole after I left. Everything. The PI's email arrived at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Elijah was in his New York office, staring at the city lights, when his phone chimed. Subject, urgent, Amara Cole investigation. Mr. Cole, you need to see this. The death certificate Marcus Hale provided you was falsified. Hospital records show Amara Cole was discharged 8 months after your departure, alive. Her current location has been confirmed. She's running a foundation. In Lighthouse Cove. She's been there for 4 years. And sir, there's something else. Marcus Hale has been making regular visits to her town. The timeline suggests. Elijah stopped reading. His hands were numb. His vision blurred. The New York skyline tilted like the world had been ripped from its axis. Alive. Amara was alive. And Marcus. Marcus had known. Had lied. For 5 years, that snake had looked him in the eye, attended board meetings, shared scotch in celebration of deals closed, all while knowing. The glass in Elijah's hand shattered. Blood dripped onto the marble floor, mixing with aged whiskey. His assistant burst in. Sir, are you? Book me a flight. His voice was raw, barely human. Lighthouse Cove. Tonight. And find Marcus Hale. I want him in my office in 1 hour. Sir, it's 2 a.m. Now. As the assistant scrambled to comply, Elijah stared at the email, at the attached photograph of a woman in a flowing white dress, standing on a coastal cliff, her natural curls wild in the ocean breeze. She looked free. And he looked like a man who'd just realized he'd murdered his own soul for a lie. But the question that shredded him wasn't just why Marcus had lied. It was, would Amara even want to see the man who abandoned her to die alone? Marcus Hale arrived at the office in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced. He'd been Elijah's partner for 15 years, the strategist behind every major acquisition, the man who'd stood beside him when they'd built Coal Industries from nothing. But tonight, his smile faltered when he saw Elijah's face. "You look like hell, Eli. What's this about?" Elijah stood by the window, his back to Marcus, his bloodied hand wrapped in a white handkerchief that was slowly turning crimson. The city sprawled below them, a kingdom built on lies. "When did she die, Marcus?" Silence. "Then, Eli, we've been through this. You know when." "When did Amara die?" Elijah turned, and Marcus took an involuntary step back. He'd seen Elijah angry before, cold, calculating, surgical. But this? This was something primal. Broken. Marcus's jaw tightened. 6 months after you left. "I told you." "You told me a lie." Elijah threw the PI's report onto the desk. Photographs scattered. Amara, alive, vibrant, standing outside the Phoenix Foundation. Amara, speaking at a women's empowerment conference. Amara smiling, genuinely smiling, in ways she never had in those final hospital days. And in the corner of one photo, Marcus Hale, watching her from across the street. The color drained from Marcus's face. "You visited her." Elijah's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 5 years of anguish. "You knew she was alive. You watched her rebuild her life. And you let me believe I'd killed her with my abandonment." "Elijah, listen to me." "Why?" The word exploded through the office. Marcus flinched. "Because she was making you weak." Marcus's composure cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. "You were changing, Eli. Talking about purpose and giving back, and reducing your hours. She was turning you into some soft philanthropist. We had the Yamamoto deal, the Singapore expansion, the Dubai contracts, and you wanted to slow down to have dinner with your wife." Elijah stared at him, unable to process the venom in his partner's voice. "I built those documents carefully," Marcus continued, his words spilling out like poison. "The affair evidence. The financial records showing her targeting wealthy men. It took months to make it believable. And the death certificate? Easy enough when you have the right connections." He laughed bitterly. "I saved you, Eli. I saved this company. Look at what we've accomplished in 5 years. We're unstoppable. You destroyed my life. I saved your empire." Marcus stepped forward, desperate now. "She was going to ruin everything we built. Every sacrifice we made. And yes, I've kept tabs on her, to make sure she stayed away. She signed an NDA, took a settlement, and moved on. She's fine, Eli. She's thriving. You both are. I did you a favor." Elijah's fist connected with Marcus's jaw before either man realized he'd moved. Marcus crashed into the desk, blood streaming from his split lip. He looked up at Elijah with something like fear. "You have 1 hour to resign and disappear," Elijah said, his voice dead calm. "If you're still in this city by sunrise, I will destroy you so completely that your grandchildren will feel the shame. Do you understand me?" Marcus scrambled to his feet, backing toward the door. "You're making a mistake. She won't take you back. You think she's been waiting for you? She hates you, Eli. I've seen her interviews. She talks about men like you, men who abandon their wives when they get sick. You're her villain." The door slammed. Elijah stood alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. His hand throbbed. His heart was a shattered thing in his chest. Marcus was right about one thing. Amara had every reason to hate him. He'd believed lies over her truth. Chose pride over love. Left her to die alone. And she'd survived. Not just survived, she transformed her pain into purpose, building something beautiful from the ashes of their marriage. Elijah looked at the photograph again. Amara on the cliff, wind in her hair, eyes on the horizon. She'd moved on. But could he? Did you see that twist coming? Comment yes or no below. The flight to Lighthouse Cove felt like a descent into purgatory. Elijah sat in first class, untouched champagne sweating beside him, staring at his reflection in the oval window. 42 years old. Silver streaking his temples. Eyes that used to command boardrooms now hollow with exhaustion. He looked like a man who'd won every battle but lost the only war that mattered. His phone buzzed relentlessly. News of Marcus's resignation was already spreading through financial networks. Board members demanded explanations. Shareholders panicked. His assistant sent 17 urgent messages. He silenced it all. What did any of it matter? The empire he'd built, the towers, the wealth, the power Marcus claimed he'd saved, it was ash in his mouth. He'd traded Amara's love for fool's gold, and the weight of that realization was suffocating. The plane touched down at dawn. Elijah rented a black sedan and drove along the coastal highway, following the GPS to Lighthouse Cove. The town emerged like something from a watercolor painting. Pastel storefronts, flower boxes, a harbor where fishing boats bobbed gently. It was everything his steel and glass world wasn't. Peaceful. Small. Human. He found the Phoenix Foundation in a converted Victorian house overlooking the water. A hand-painted sign swayed in the morning breeze. Through the windows, he could see women gathered in a circle, a support group perhaps. Their laughter drifted out, genuine and warm. And there, leading the group, was Amara. Elijah's breath caught. She was breathtaking. Not the fragile, dying woman he'd abandoned. Not the memory that haunted his nightmares. She wore a flowing cream dress, her natural curls cascading over her shoulders, her golden brown skin radiant in the morning light. When she smiled at something one of the women said, it reached her eyes, a smile he'd never deserved, never earned. She looked whole. He looked shattered. A young woman noticed him through the window, mid-20s, protective posture, and whispered something to Amara. Amara's gaze shifted toward the glass. For 3 eternal seconds, their eyes met across the distance. Her smile vanished. The warmth in her expression iced over into something he recognized, the look of a woman seeing her nightmare walk through her peaceful dream. She said something to the group, then disappeared into a back office. The young woman, clearly her assistant, stepped outside, arms crossed. Mr. Cole. Her voice was cold. You need to leave. I need to see her. She doesn't want to see you. Please. 5 minutes. I need to. You need to leave. The assistant's eyes were hard. Do you know what you did to her? She spent 8 months in that hospital alone. No visitors. No calls. Fighting cancer while processing abandonment. The nurses said she'd cry herself to sleep calling your name. Each word was a blade. When she got strong enough to walk, you know what she did. She tracked down every woman in that hospital whose husband or partner had left them during their illness. She sat with them. Held their hands. Promised them they weren't alone. That's how this foundation started, in a cancer ward, with a woman you left to die. Elijah's knees nearly buckled. I didn't know. Marcus lied to me. She doesn't care about your excuses. The assistant stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Amara rebuilt herself from nothing. She found purpose in her pain. She's happy now, Mr. Cole. Actually happy. And you think you can just show up after 5 years and what? Ask for forgiveness? Beg her to understand. I just need to tell her. That you're sorry? The assistant laughed bitterly. She knows you're sorry. She saw your face through that window. You look like a man who's been living in hell. Good. You should. Through the window, Elijah could see Amara in her office, her back to him, her shoulders trembling. One of the women from the group went in, wrapped arms around her. Support. Community. Love. Everything he'd denied her. The assistant's voice softened slightly, though the steel remained. She spent 2 years forgiving you, Mr. Cole. Not for you, for herself. So she could move forward. And she did. She's free now. If you love her even a fraction of what you claim, you'll let her stay that way. She turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind her. Elijah stood on the sidewalk as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over this town where Amara had bloomed without him. His hand pressed against his chest, trying to hold together a heart that felt like it was collapsing. He'd come looking for redemption. But maybe redemption meant accepting he didn't deserve it. Maybe loving her now meant disappearing. Again. This time, for good. Elijah sat in his rental car for 3 hours. The engine was off. The windows fogged with his breathing. His phone lay dead on the passenger seat, 37 missed calls from his legal team, his CFO, his publicist. The world he'd built was probably burning. He couldn't bring himself to care. Through the foundation's windows, he watched Amara's day unfold like scenes from a life he'd forfeited. She led workshops, embraced crying women, laughed over lunch with her team. Every gesture radiated the strength he'd once tried to control, the compassion he'd taken for granted. Around 4 p.m., the group dispersed. Amara stood at the door, hugging each woman goodbye. Then she looked directly at his car, she'd known he was there all along, and walked down to the harbor. An invitation. Or a confrontation. Elijah followed at a distance. She stopped at the end of a weathered pier, waves crashing below, seabirds circling overhead. Her cream dress billowed in the salt wind. She didn't turn when his footsteps echoed on the wooden planks, but her spine straightened. Preparing for impact. "You always did lurk when you were afraid to speak," she said softly. Her voice, God, her voice, was exactly as he remembered. Gentle but unflinching. Amara. 5 years, Elijah. She turned then, and the sight of her face up close nearly broke him. Older. Wiser. Scarred by what she'd survived, but somehow more beautiful for it. 5 years of silence. And now you show up at my sanctuary like a ghost demanding absolution. "I'm not," his voice cracked. "I'm not demanding anything. I needed to see that you were real. That you were alive." "Why?" "So you could feel better about abandoning me." Her eyes were dry. She'd cried all her tears years ago. "Marcus told you, didn't he? That I survived. That's the only reason you're here." Marcus lied. The words tumbled out. About everything. The affair, the evidence, your death. All of it fabricated. "I just found out 3 days ago. Amara, I thought you were. You wanted to believe it." Her words were surgical. Precise. "That's what you've never understood. Marcus didn't force you to leave. He gave you an excuse to run from something that terrified you." "What?" "Intimacy." She stepped closer, and he could smell the jasmine perfume she still wore, the scent that haunted him. "You loved me, Elijah. I know you did. But you loved your control more. Your empire. Your carefully constructed world where emotions were weaknesses to be managed. When I got sick, when you saw me vulnerable and human, it shattered the fantasy. So when Marcus offered you an exit, painted me as a liar, a gold digger, you took it. Because leaving me was easier than loving me through the mess." Every word landed like a physical blow because every word was true. "I would have forgiven the leaving," she continued, her voice thick with old pain. "If you'd come back. If you'd called even once. But you didn't, Elijah. You erased me. Built your towers higher so you wouldn't have to look down at what you destroyed." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "I know what I did. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know you've moved on. Built something beautiful. You're free, Amara. And I'm still," he gestured helplessly at himself. "I'm still the same broken man who couldn't choose love over fear." She studied him, her head tilting slightly. "You're not the same man. That man wouldn't have come here. That man would have sent lawyers or a check. Then what am I?" "Lost." The word hung between them like a life raft. "You're lost, Elijah. And you think finding me will give you direction. But that's not how this works." The sun was setting, painting the sky in golds and roses. Amara looked toward the horizon, her profile outlined in dying light. "I spent 2 years hating you," she said quietly. "Another year forgiving you. The last 2 learning to forgive myself, for loving a man who couldn't love me back the way I needed. Do you understand what that took?" "No. Honest. Raw. But I want to." She finally looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not love, that was gone, or transformed into something else. But perhaps, recognition. of shared pain, of parallel journeys through different hells. Then you need to do the work I did, she said. Not for me. Not to win me back. For yourself. Figure out why you run. Why you hide. Why you build empires instead of relationships. She paused. There's a grief counselor in town. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She helped me. Maybe she can help you. Amara. I'm not ready to forgive you, Elijah. I don't know if I ever will be. But, she took a shaky breath. I don't want to carry hate anymore either. So if you're serious about changing, about actually facing yourself, stay. Do the work. Stop running. She turned to leave, then paused. And Elijah? The Foundation's annual gala is in 3 months. We raise money for women rebuilding their lives after abandonment. If you want to make amends, write a check. A real one. Then disappear back to your empire. What if I don't want the empire anymore? The question stopped her. She looked back surprised, searching his face for deception. Finding only devastation. Then figure out what you do want, she said softly. And this time, don't abandon yourself to find it. She walked away, leaving him on the pier as darkness fell. But for the first time in 5 years, Elijah didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he'd finally surfaced. And he knew what he had to do. 3 months passed like a baptism. Elijah rented a small cottage on the edge of Lighthouse Cove, nothing like his penthouses, just weathered wood and ocean views. He met with Dr. Sarah Mitchell twice a week, unpacking decades of emotional armor. The sessions were brutal. He confronted his father's coldness, his mother's absence, the belief carved into his bones that love was transactional. That vulnerability was death. He cried for the first time in 30 years. He wrote letters to Amara he never sent, 43 of them, each one peeling back another layer of his cowardice. He volunteered at a men's support group for those struggling with emotional unavailability. He walked the beach every morning, learning to exist without achievements defining his worth. And he wrote the check. $5 million to the Phoenix Foundation. Anonymous. Because this wasn't about recognition. The night of the gala arrived. The Foundation's Victorian house was transformed, string lights wrapped around columns, jazz drifting through open windows, the coastal elite mingling with survivors Amara had helped. Elijah stood across the street in a simple black suit, no jewelry, no flash. Just a man who'd learned to be still. He wasn't planning to go in. He'd promised to disappear. But then he saw Marcus Hale stepping out of a limousine. Elijah's blood went cold. Marcus wore his arrogance like a second skin, approaching the entrance with a cruel smile. Elijah crossed the street in long strides, intercepting him on the steps. You're not welcome here. Marcus turned, surprise flickering across his face before morphing into mockery. Elijah. Still playing the reformed penitent? How noble. He gestured at the gala. I'm a donor. Wrote a generous check. Your ex-wife was quite grateful. You're using her charity to mock me. I'm using it to prove a point. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping. You can play dress-up in this little coastal fantasy, but you're still the man who walked away. I just gave you permission to do what you wanted anyway. And look, he gestured around. She's thriving without you. I did her a favor too. Something inside Elijah snapped, not into rage, but into crystal clarity. You're right, he said quietly. I did want to leave. I was terrified. And you exploited that fear because you're a predator who feeds on other people's weaknesses. Marcus's smile faltered. But here's the difference between us, Elijah continued. I faced what I did. Sat in the wreckage. Felt every ounce of pain I caused. You. He studied Marcus with something like pity. You're still running. Still manipulating. Still thinking relationships are chess games to win. You've gone soft. No. I've gotten honest. Elijah stepped closer. And honestly? You're not worth my anger. You're a parasite. You always were. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy being one myself. Elijah. Amara's voice cut through the tension. Both men turned. She stood in the doorway wearing an elegant emerald gown, her natural curls pinned up with gold clasps. She looked like royalty. But it was her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at Elijah with love, that were now focused on Marcus with recognition. "Mr. Hale, I received your donation." Her voice was ice. "And I'm returning it. We don't accept money from men who profit from others' suffering." She handed him an envelope. "Your check. And a restraining order. Stay away from my foundation. Stay away from me." Marcus's face purpled. "You can't." "I can. And I have." She gestured, and 2 security guards appeared. "Escort Mr. Hale off the property." As they led Marcus away, sputtering threats about lawyers and reputation, Amara turned to Elijah. They stood in the glow of string lights, the sounds of the gala a distant hum. "You told me about him," she said softly. "Dr. Mitchell. She's my friend. She told me you've been doing the work. I promised I would." "The $5 million anonymous donation. That was you." He didn't deny it. She studied him for a long moment. "You look different. Lighter. I feel like I've been underwater for 20 years and finally came up for air." He gestured toward the gala. "I wasn't going to come in. I promised to disappear." "Is that what you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with history and hope and hurt. "No," he said honestly. "What I want is impossible. I want to rewind time. I want to be the man who believed you, who held your hand through the chemo, who built a life with you instead of an empire without you. But I can't have that." "So what can you have?" "I don't know," he admitted. Maybe just this. Standing here. Knowing you're alive and happy. Knowing I finally learned the lessons you tried to teach me 7 years ago. That love isn't control. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That the only empire worth building is the one inside yourself." Tears glistened in Amara's eyes, catching the light. "I'm not the same woman you married," she whispered. "I know. And you're not the same man who left me." "I know." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I don't love you anymore, Elijah. Not the way I did. That woman died in that hospital bed, and I grieved her. But," she paused, searching for words, "I don't hate you either. And maybe that's enough for now." "Enough for what?" She extended her hand. "Come inside. Meet the women you're helping. See what's been built from the ashes. Not as my husband. Not as my redemption arc. Just as Elijah. A man learning to be better." He looked at her hand, the same hand that had reached for him 5 years ago, that he'd refused to hold. This time, he took it. And together, they walked inside. Not toward a reunion, but toward something quieter. Truer. Forgiveness. The gala shimmered with stories of survival. Elijah moved through the crowd like a man learning a new language, the language of listening. He met Sarah, who'd rebuilt her life after her husband left during her mastectomy. He met Jennifer, who'd started a business after being abandoned with 3 children. He met Grace, whose husband disappeared when she was diagnosed with MS, and who now ran a support group for other women facing chronic illness alone. Each woman's story was a mirror reflecting what he'd done to Amara. Each handshake was an act of penance. Amara watched from across the room, conversing with donors, but her eyes kept finding him. Not with longing, that ship had sailed, but with something like curiosity. As if she was seeing him for the first time without the armor of her hurt or his pride. Near midnight, as guests filtered out and volunteers cleaned up, Elijah found Amara on the back terrace overlooking the ocean. The moon painted a silver path across the water. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said quietly. "Thank you for actually changing." She leaned against the railing. "Most men who do what you did never admit they were wrong. They rewrite history, blame the woman, move on to the next relationship carrying the same patterns. I almost did that. Built higher towers. Worked harder. Convinced myself I was the victim of Marcus's deception." He stood beside her, careful to maintain distance. "But towers don't keep you warm at night. And being a victim doesn't make you whole." They stood in comfortable silence, watching waves crash against the rocks below. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Do you go back to New York? Reclaim your empire?" "I'm selling it." The words came easier than he expected. "Coal industries. All of it. I've been negotiating with a consortium that actually cares about ethical business practices. The money, most of it will go to foundations like yours. Women's health. Abandonment support. Cancer research. Amara turned to him, stunned. Elijah, that's your life's work. No. He met her eyes. That was my monument to fear. My cathedral of avoidance. I don't need it anymore. Then what will you do? He smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask he'd worn for decades. I've been offered a teaching position. At the community college here. Business ethics. Helping young entrepreneurs understand that success without humanity is just expensive emptiness. He paused. And Dr. Mitchell asked if I'd co-lead the men's group. Apparently, I'm a cautionary tale with a decent redemption arc. Amara laughed, a genuine surprised sound that lit up the night. You? Teaching? I know. Shocking. His smile softened. I thought about leaving. Going to some remote place where no one knew my name. But Dr. Mitchell said that's just running in a different direction. Real change means staying in the discomfort. Facing the people you've hurt. Building something meaningful from the ruins. That's very wise. I have a good therapist. They smiled at each other, and for a moment, a ghost of what they'd been flickered between them. But it was just that, a ghost. Not haunting. Just acknowledging what had been and what could never be again. I need you to know something, Amara said softly. I've started seeing someone. David. He's a teacher. Kind. Patient. Nothing like, she caught herself. Nothing like who I was, Elijah finished. I'm happy for you, Amara. Truly. You deserve someone who shows up. Who stays. You're staying now. For myself. And maybe, he hesitated. Maybe to prove to both of us that people can change. Not enough to erase the past. But enough to build a different future. Amara reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. You're going to be okay, Elijah Cole. So are you. I already am. She walked back inside, leaving him with the ocean and the stars and a peace he'd never known existed. His phone buzzed, his assistant confirming the final sale details of Cole Industries. 42 years of building. Gone with a signature. And he felt lighter than air. 6 months later, Elijah stood before his first class at Lighthouse Cove Community College. 23 students stared back at him, young, hopeful, hungry for success. He could see himself in their eyes. The ambition. The belief that achievement equaled worth. Let me tell you about the most successful failure of my life, he began. I built $1 billion empire. I had everything society said I should want. And I was the emptiest man alive because I sacrificed the one thing that actually mattered, love, on the altar of ambition. The students leaned forward. And across campus, in the library, Amara sat with David, reviewing grant applications for the Phoenix Foundation's expansion. Through the window, she could see Elijah's classroom. She watched him teach, gesturing passionately, no longer the cold billionaire but something warmer. Human. She smiled, then returned to her work. They weren't a love story anymore. But they'd become something perhaps more important. Two people who'd walked through fire separately and emerged with hard-won wisdom. Two people who'd learned that redemption isn't about being forgiven by those you've hurt. It's about forgiving yourself enough to become someone worthy of the gift of another day. Elijah caught her glance through the window. They nodded at each other, acknowledgement, respect, release. Then they both returned to their separate, healing lives. Building not monuments to pain, but foundations of grace. If this story touched you, like and subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Drop a comment sharing what lesson hit you hardest. We read every single one. You're part of this family, and your stories matter to us.